Okay, it's time for lesson 2. Do the brainstorm. Now, before we start, the first thing that I want to establish here is my golden rule for every workshop, which is this. If it's not on a post-it note, it doesn't exist. Everyone always thinks that they'll remember things. Everyone is always wrong. So if you want something to survive the duration of the workshop, never mind surviving beyond the end of the workshop, write that thing down on a post-it note. Okay? Okay. What I'm going to do in lesson 2 is provide you with a couple of variations on the brainstorm methodology. But before we do that, we talked about established axioms last time. So let me just quickly define brainstorm for you for the context of these lessons. It is essentially come up with a load of ideas with the absolute bare minimum self-censorship and judgment. Now, the popular way of putting this is that there's no such thing as a bad idea, but I think we all really know that that isn't true. So I actually prefer Ed Catmull's version, which he talks about in this book, Creativity Inc., which you should definitely read, which is kind of more like every idea sucks. What we mean by that is we want, ideally, in a brainstorm, to be getting the raw versions of people's ideas out so that we can do a bit of co-creation work to refine them and build on them, either in the brainstorm workshop itself or later afterwards if there isn't time. The reason for that is that the rough edges of ideas are where the interesting stuff is. If something is well too thought out before people verbalize it and put it out into the world, there's less room to sort of resize and reshape later. And you're more likely to miss little kernels of genius that might exist in what initially appeared, at least at first glance, to be completely moronic. You know, you think about it in your head and you're like, that's a stupid idea. I don't want to share that. I'm going to look like an idiot. That's a bad idea. Like, get it out there. And see what I said? Yeah, bad idea. There are such things as bad ideas, and that is not sharing bad ideas. Now, as with the last section of it, you're going to have 30 minutes for this. So let's talk through a couple of basic versions and variations. Now, version 1 of a brainstorm is your sort of classic chuck ideas on a whiteboard brainstorm. You just give everyone a pile of post-it notes. If you're doing it in real life, if you're doing it on Miro, you know, you've got infinite post-it notes, so don't worry about it. And just have people write ideas down and put them up on a wall, whether that's a virtual wall or a real wall. Couldn't be simpler. Version 2 would be to get people to have a pile of post-it notes, write as many ideas as they can, and then put them up on a wall once the time has run out. And this is usually known as a silent brainstorm. And there are sort of variations on these versions. And the key variation really is the way that you get people to talk through their ideas as you're running the brainstorm. Variation A is you talk through at the end. So you have everyone putting the ideas on the wall, you run the whole session, and then people talk through their ideas at the very end of it. Variation B would be talk through as you go. So every time someone puts an idea on the wall, they say what it is. This is actually my preference, since it has a tendency to spark further ideas in the group. Someone saying, as I mentioned in the last lesson, let's write the logo on the moon, might trigger someone else thinking, oh, actually, or we could, you know, carve it on the side of Mount Everest, or let's rent a farmer's field on the Heathrow approach and plant our message in wildflowers in a field of barley. So everyone flying into the airport sees the brand logo, right? You're triggering further ideas from people. Okay, I'm going to interrupt myself here because I sort of contradict myself later on in the video here. So I'm going to put a quick caveat on what I just said then. When I say this is my preference if I'm just running a kind of straight up brainstorming session where we're just going to run the whole thing in a row. Later on, when I'm talking about things and the way that I would run it in this situation, I talk about doing mainly silent brainstorms. So if you're just going to do a straight up brainstorm and you're just going to run it as like a 10 or 15 minute bit, do it like this, get people to talk through it. If you're going to do it the way that I would do it, which I explain later in the video, do it the way that I tell you to do it later on. Clear? Thank you. The other variation is how you chunk the time up for the brainstorm. Variation X is that you run the whole session in one go. Don't do this. And then the other variation of that is to cut the session up into chunks. Do that one. That's the one that you should do. I'd like to close this lesson. Here's a short one, this one. Wrong. With how I would run the session if I was doing that half hour, if I had that half hour chunk of time to run a brainstorm. So I would do an 8-minute initial pass, so an 8-minute initial brainstorm. So everyone grab some Post-its and write down a bunch of ideas. Keep them to yourselves and we'll share them in a few minutes. All right. I prefer using the silent brainstorm. If you think back to what we talked about in the introduction, that's a sort of safer way for people to do this thing. It's a good way of walking people into it. They're not being obliged to share their ideas straight away. You know, they can build up this little pile. But again, if you see people screwing up ideas and throwing them away, you know, try to stop them from doing that if you can. Then I would go on to do a 7-minute initial share. So put your Post-it notes on the wall and talk us through the ideas you've put up there. I would say at this point that if anyone else has an idea that's the same or related, just jump in, pop out there and talk us through your idea. So so my idea, put the logo on the moon. Oh, well, I actually had an idea about putting it in a farmer's field instead. So I'll put that one up there. I thought we could do it in wildflowers, whatever you want to do. Going through this, make sure that everyone gets to share their ideas and make sure that there's no judgment allowed. So if anyone sort of starts making faces like, I think that's a bad idea, just say, look, we're not judging these things. We're just getting them up there and seeing what we've got in our minds. That should take you to 15 minutes. Then I would probably do a 5-minute second round. Now, this can be either for brand new ideas or yes-anding stuff that's gone up on the board already. So building out other ideas, adding to things that have already been discussed, or, you know, completely different stuff. Now, for this second round, have people add to the board as they write them, but not read out what they're putting up there. So it's kind of a combination of the silent brainstorm and the traditional brainstorm. So don't gather up your ideas, just put them up there, but don't say anything as you're doing it. Once we've done that, I would then do a 10-minute final share. So this is the opportunity to talk through the new ideas, the yes ands, and so on, and just have an overall discussion about exactly what it is that, you know, what you've got up on the board, and just have that little back and forth with people and start rearranging things or adding stuff. But really important, keep to your timing, right? 8-minute initial brainstorm, got to be no more than 8 minutes. If people are running out of ideas, you can cut it short. 7-minute share, don't go over 7 minutes. 5-minute second round, don't go over 5 minutes. For the 10-minute final share, don't go over 10 minutes, because you're going to want to have that final half an hour for your prioritization. Okay. So if you put that structure in place and you use all of the things that I talked about in lesson 1, what you should have now is a really good set of quite focused, quite solid, well thought out ideas that you can then go on to prioritize and select from, which is what we're going to be covering in our final lesson, prioritize and select. Once again, thank you very much for listening. Final lesson after this.